Morning, Trainiacs. We've got a little bit of a, just a little swim, like a 30-minute swim, and then later today, a 30-minute run. It's Friday. It's rest day. Typically, Friday is a rest day. You just kind of prepare yourself for a big weekend, even though I'm not really training too big right now. So one of the challenges that has plagued the scientific community, not me, but other smart people, with regards to triathlon is that it's such a dynamic sport. There's swimming, there's biking, there's running, there's strength. It's such a long sport. There's nutrition. It's a really hard sport to actually get data on because controlling variables is key to actually figuring out what works and what actually generates results. So there's really very few studies specifically about what helps triathletes. But there actually is one study that was done at Ironman Copenhagen with 61 athletes. They tested dozens of things, and there were 3 things that consistently showed a really strong correlation with Ironman performance. So from these 3 things, we can design a triathlon training plan to accomplish each of those 3 things. I'm going to explain what those 3 things are and how you can incorporate them into your training plan. Right after I get some tunes going and we swim. Who needs TikTok? 30 minutes, more or less cruisy, just some faster 1-minute efforts at the end, and ended with just a brilliant song. Here, check this out. This one. You'll like this. Rickroll! Alright, so in this study of the 61 Ironman athletes at Ironman Copenhagen, what the researchers want to find out were, what are the physiological characteristics? What are the things that people can work on that are correlated with actually improved performance? Now, keep in mind, correlation is not causation. So it's not that these findings were what caused the actual improved performance. It's what were the things that were associated with the improved performance, and what is the thing that you can do in your training, in your diet, in your daily life that actually causes that improved performance. And the 3 big things that they found out were an improved fat metabolism, a higher ability to access fat as fuel, a high Vo2 Max, a high ability to process a lot of oxygen every single minute. This is your top end, and a better body composition. Now, how do you go about adjusting your training to cater to getting these 3 requirements dialed in without just training blindly? Well, that's where optimizing your training comes in. This is what we do on teamtrainiac.com. We optimize for these 3 things. First way that we do that is with diet. Let me explain. Okay, so the first requirement of having a high fat metabolism starts here in the kitchen with your diet. And if you know me, you know that I like using spreadsheets to explain my point. So what I've laid out here is the inputs of what we know typical athletes go through. And we know regardless of whether you are low carb or high carb, you're probably starting with about 2,500 calories of energy on board, stored in your muscles and your liver. Next, we know that most people can comfortably consume about 60 grams of carbs every hour during exercise. Now, of course, there's going to be a lot of you that say, hey, Taren, that number's actually 90. Well, that number of 90 is when you combine glucose and fructose tends to aggravate people's stomachs, especially during exercise. Also, there was one study that showed that the more carbs you consumed, the higher your likelihood of DNFing a race was. So do you really want to bump that up beyond 60 and ride the lightning a little bit? I don't know if you do, but we can show you what happens if you want to do that. A typical high carb athlete will also burn roughly 0.4 grams of fat from their on-body storage per minute, and most athletes that are finishing in the bulk of the Ironman finishers in that like 12 to 15 hour range are burning around 750 calories per minute. And what happens, just based on the math, is that you run out of energy around hour 8. That's why it starts feeling hard towards the end of the bike and right at the start of the run. And what happens when you run out of energy? You either stop, you DNF, you go really, really slow and start shuffling and you lose your pace that you trained for, or your muscles start breaking down because your body has to get that energy from somewhere, and that's where you start getting really sore. You're not functioning well. You start seeing people that are wobbling all across the finish line. Now, what about the low carb athlete that starts with the same 2,500 calories on board, has 60 grams of carbs, burns the 750 calories per hour, but instead has increased their ability to access fat as fuel up to around 1.2 grams of carbs per minute? In that case, you're A-okay. You've got more calories than you need. Now, there are going to be a couple of people that say, well, hey, how are all these people finishing? Well, you can do things like this. You can manipulate this. What if you end up riding the lightning and risking adding more carbs and going up to 90? Well, in that case, you do end up getting a little bit further into the race, but it still gets quite hard. Now, what if you're in this case and you say, well, I'm going to take on 90 and I'm a little bit faster athlete, so I'm probably going to finish in the 9 to 11. Well, in that case, you're going to burn more calories per hour, more like 1,000. And again, you start running out of calories. Smart people might say, well, if I am a faster athlete, I'm probably just going to naturally burn a little bit more fat per minute, which is true. But you still end up getting to that point where you're playing this delicate game of, do you have enough calories on board? And are you taking in too much? That's why you see a lot of really talented athletes that are slowing down towards the end of a race, that are walking, and you think like, these are some of the best athletes in the world and they're really struggling with this event. Now, what happens if you are a fast athlete and you want to perform with low carb? Well, you still have the 2,500 calories to start with. You can keep your calories that you take in nice and low so that it's less of a strain on your gut. You don't even need to have that high amount of fat burning of 1.2. What if you only reach 1? Totally fine. And you're burning 1,000 calories per hour? Well, in that case, yes, you can still run out of calories, but in that case, you're still in this sort of range here of the 9 and 10, and you're riding that fine line of, yeah, it's going to be really tough towards the end of the race, but you have more wiggle room. You can just easily go and, as you start fading, increase the amount of calories that you've got to just 70, just a little bit. It just gives you that ability to make sure that you have energy on board, no matter if you are a fast athlete or you are in the bulk of the field. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to go keto, but this means that you need to be selective of when you use your carbs. Just like you're selective in training of when you go hard versus when you go easy, you should be selective of when you take in your carbs. You should be selective of maybe taking carbs for the hard stuff and not taking carbs during the easy stuff. And this certainly doesn't mean keto. In my case, I average around 130 grams of carbs every single day. I have Easter dinner with cabbage rolls and pierogies on Christmas. Of course, people are going to be saying, well, Jan Frodeno doesn't talk about low carb, but he's going and setting all-time world course records. Yeah, he is. But what Jan Frodeno does and what most pros do that we all can't is they train upwards of 20, 25, 35 hours a week, and that constant amount of training constantly depletes their blood glucose and their muscle glycogen, so they're going to be burning more fat in all of their training even if they are taking on carbs, because they just can't keep up with the amount of calories and muscle glycogen that they're burning. So by nature, even if they are a high carb athlete, just that higher amount of training ends up increasing their fat metabolism. So it's less about diet and more about just what your fat metabolism is. And the theory, we had Dr. Paul Larson on our podcast, and he said he believes that age group athletes can get a 25-hour average training week kind of result with only 15 hours of training. All right, so that was the first finding. The next finding was Vo2 Max, the top end, the speed. Let's get into that. Back in here, this is where the Vo2 Max, the top end, the speed, the strength, the increased ability to go fast, increased ability to process a lot of oxygen per minute. It happens on the trainer here, and either on a treadmill set to a really high level or on the track, like really hard, tough intervals, working that top end. Vo2 Max is really commonly looked at as one of the things that dictates really good sports performance. It's the ability to process a lot of oxygen every single minute. The higher the Vo2 Max, the better. Now, I've been tested in the high 50s. That's really nothing too special. A lot of pros are in the 70s. We've even had somebody like Gustav Iden, last year's half Ironman world champion, be up around 90, I think even a little bit higher than that. And how you end up building Vo2 Max is more with the HIIT sessions, the high intensity interval training sessions. The anywhere from 15 seconds to 8-minute intervals are your real sweet spot for the Vo2 Max building sessions. Now, how hard is hard enough? Well, the rule of thumb that I like to use is it's hard enough that it feels really challenging, but it's not so hard that you are fading towards the end of an interval or by the final interval that you do, and you end feeling like you could have done one more interval. That's a real key one. If you go to the end of the well and you drain your tank and you just completely like have those instances where you're spent by the end of the workout, that's going to deteriorate your ability to back up training tomorrow, the next day, and the day after. It's going to start dipping you into overtraining. Now, how much of this is enough? Well, you can do maybe 1 session a week, maybe 2 sessions a week. Rule of thumb is that even really elite athletes can't handle more than about 60 total minutes above their threshold in a week. And that's a lot. If you think about how hard you're going and you're looking at just the amount of time accumulating all of the intervals, and you are pushing yourself hard enough, 60 minutes of threshold or above threshold is pretty hard. Now, the last requirement of a good body composition is maybe not surprising, but the exact nuances are probably going to surprise you, because it surprised me. It's not exactly what you think. So I've been going to Kona since 2013 to spectate, in all fairness. And one thing that I've noticed is when I first started going to Kona, everyone was thin, wispy, like almost how pro cyclists look. And then lately, in the last couple of years, what I've noticed is everyone all of a sudden looks like a friggin' bodybuilder, like a bunch of gorillas qualifying for the world championships. What's really interesting about this is I start thinking, well, how is this when I've always thought that lighter is better? Well, is lighter better? Or is it maybe CrossFit is better? Bodybuilding is better? So what this study found was that body weight actually isn't associated with improved performance. Body composition was. And what that means is it's a low body fat percentage that actually makes a difference. So what's with all these bigger athletes in Kona that are doing well? Well, it's not that CrossFitters are all of a sudden getting into Ironman and doing well. It's that by nature, if you've paid attention over the last bunch of years, there's been an increased focus on strength as a supplemental activity. So you're seeing a lot more athletes getting more muscular, and those athletes just happen to be the ones that are qualifying. And the reason for that is that triathlon is a very strength endurance kind of sport. It's not as strictly endurance based as, say, just a marathon or a cycling event. It's more strength endurance because you have to run while tired. Because it's such a long event, being able to hold up your body weight and function and be strong all the way to the end of the run is what's critical. And you need to have a lot of strength to be able to do that. So, how we build this into training on Team Trainiac is we have, as you start progressing more, a minimum of 2 strength sessions a week, because it's just so important. So when people say, well, I don't want to do strength because I don't want to get slower, I don't want to put on mass, you don't need to worry about that. It's not that way. You really need to focus on strength, and science supports that. And save. So that's it for today, Trainiacs. A little 30-minute run, a 30-minute swim earlier this morning. That's a Friday. Now, if you are listening to this and you're like, well, I want more, how can I put more of this together? Because a lot of this is really just ideas. What we are doing right now until the end of at least April, maybe the end of May, basically as long as lockdown is going on, to help keep everyone busy and working on triathlon while you've got more time, we put together a free virtual triathlon training camp that you can get by going to triathlontaren.com/free camp. And we had in PhDs and strength training coaches, and we've talked about how you actually put this into a training plan, and essentially what we do on teamtrainiac.com that is very backed by science. So triathlontaren.com/free camp, you just put in your email address and boom, done. You're keeping busy working on bettering yourself in triathlon while we're not doing triathlon, but hopefully that keeps you entertained. And if you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button below. Later, Trainiacs.